Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. Today, I am delighted to talk again to Joram Van Klaveren. You're most welcome, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be on your channel again.
Now, Joram was actually last on Blogging Theology back in September when he told us of his extraordinary journey from Christianity to Islam. As a former member of the Dutch Parliament and a representative of the Party for Freedom, inverted commas, he submitted numerous bills related to Islam, such as those calling for the closing of mosques, I kid you not, the removing of the Quran from Parliament, and from banning Islam from the Netherlands. Now, as I'm sure you all know, he is a Muslim. And you can read about his personal and theological journey in this highly recommended book called Apostate. There's the front cover with forwards by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and Professor Abdul Hakim Murad, no less. And there's a little inscription or saying, which I really like, it's very brief, by the Roman statesman and writer Cicero, who said, "They condemn what they do not understand. They condemn what they do not understand." I think that pretty much sums it all up. Recently, much, as we know, has happened in Europe, with Marine Le Pen gaining her highest ever vote in the French presidential elections. Even though she lost, she actually achieved the highest level of popular support in history. And President Macron, who won the election, is increasingly occupying far-right positions in French politics. The question really I have, and for Joram as well, is, are we seeing a far-right Islamophobic resurgence just in the French Republic? Or is this a phenomenon across the whole of the European continent? What is the situation today in Holland, Belgium, Sweden, and Austria, for example? And Joram has kindly agreed to give us his assessment of the dangers, especially as seen in recent mainstream reporting on Islam and Muslims. And I've seen some of this footage, which we'll talk about now. And it's actually quite strikingly shocking. And I'm very grateful for Joram agreeing to come on today to share this with us, so we are aware of what's actually going on in Europe and places like Holland and so on. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, again, thank you very much. Well, I was asked to give a brief introduction to the topic of rising anti-Islam politics. And well, I think it's good if we focus on Europe because that's the context we live in, of course. And but it's good to be aware of the fact that this is a global development that we see, because when you look at India, for example, we've got the Hindutva. Where people who with a Hindu background think that India is only India if there are no people with a Muslim background or a Christian background. It has to be all Hindu. So like Hindu nationalism is something we see in Hindutva, and they focus especially on Islam and Muslims. And when we look at China, for example, we see how terrible the Uyghur people are treated in concentration camps, and the most horrific things happen to them and to this whole community. And now we see that the Uyghur Muslims, that's the biggest Muslim community in China, slowly faces the same treatment. So also in China, we see this anti-Islam sentiment. And of course, we have Australia and New Zealand, where we have the Christchurch attack a few years ago with the crazy guy, the terrorist who killed so many innocent people. In the United States, where we had not so long ago Trump, that said we need a Muslim ban, and of course we are in Europe. And as we said, we'll focus on the context in Europe. And I think it's a very worrying development here. Perhaps it's good to start with several causes of this rise of anti-Islam sentiments in Europe. And I sum up five. First is the historical context, because it's always been a part of European culture. And Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad from your country, who wrote a book. It's called Traveling Home. And it's a great book. And in this book, he mentions this, the first time that Europeans identify themselves as Europeans.
Yes.
And this isn't about black people or people with LGBT or whatever. It's really focused on Islam, because in 732, so ages ago, there was this battle in Poitiers in France between the Muslims and the Europeans. And this is the first battle that Europeans said we are Europeans.
Yeah.
And in the year 754, there was the oldest manuscript they found where Europeans talk about themselves as Europeans. And they said, well, we are Europeans because we are not Muslims. So the first textual evidence we have that Europeans talk about themselves as Europeans is that they identify themselves as not Muslims. So being not Muslim was also almost a part of the basic concept of European identity. So that's something that's very remarkable. And of course, we have a lot of clashes with the Ottoman Empire back then. But the historical point has to do with theology as well, of course, because Europe was Christian. And the Ottoman Empire, for example, and also the northern of Africa was Muslim. So a lot of Christian scholars wrote a lot of books. For example, Martin Luther about the Turks, and he was very anti-Islam in a theological way. So he said, well, Islam is, so to say, the religion of the Antichrist. Yeah. So that is part of European history, part of European heritage. And a lot of people, of course, because of secularization, don't know this anymore. But this is a sentiment that's in the culture. So even if you don't know it, it's something you, in a way, in a way you will receive it in your, so to say, in a cultural way, and in your way of being brought up as a European.
Yeah, I'm rereading at the moment Professor Edward Said's great book Orientalism. He was professor at Columbia University, sadly passed away, and there's an absolutely fundamental, crucial book that changed the perception of many, looking at how Western perceptions, going right back to ancient Greece, of the other, the people from the Orient, not just Muslims, but people, Arabs as well, very deeply rooted. And it still persists today in media portrayals of Muslims in movies and Hollywood and in popular media as well. So this is what you're saying is a very well researched, academically researched field. I mentioned Edward Said's book Orientalism, which it has become an absolute classic in talking precisely about this kind of portrayal of the other, the Arab, the Muslim in our culture.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. No, true, absolutely true, and it's a good thing to mention. And but this is just one part, I think, when it comes to why do we see this rise of anti-Islam sentiment. So the first thing is there's a historical basis, historical fundament in the culture of Europe. But the second thing is, of course, after the fall of the Soviet Union, and the atheist ideology of communism, we saw that the tensions that were always there between the West and the East, in a way, between Christianity and Islam, it popped up again.
Yes, they kind of resurfaced. They've been suppressed by the Cold War, the Soviet Union, and now whoosh, it's back again.
So, and that's something, because you mentioned, for example, movies. That's something you see when you look at James Bond movies, for example. For some decades, you saw the evil empire, the Soviet Union, all the spies and stuff. It was always the East in a Soviet sense. But after 1990, so to say, 1989, you saw this changing. And then all of a sudden, the Arab terrorist was there. Exactly. So it's something that has to do with the fall of the former enemy. So the old enemy was back again. And it was, of course, Islam. Then, of course, we have terrorism and committed by people who call themselves Muslims. And it's something that is true, of course. And, of course, that scares people and that makes them worried about who are these people? What is this new religion we don't know anything about? And, of course, media, the continuous repeating of incorrect images, information that is scary. You repeat it time after time after time after time. That has a lot of impact, of course. But also the behavior of some Muslims that has to do with this idea that Islam is something scary, because of course when you look at the internet or television and you see all those scary images, and you hear about terrorism, and then you look at in your own street and you see these young guys talking in a very negative way, perhaps doing stuff that are criminal or whatever. Then you're confirmed in your idea. Whoa, that's a scary thing. But of course, if you see practicing Muslims who behave very well, nice, gentle, etc., then of course you see, whoa, there's something strange here. I see this stuff on television that's almost at odds with the things I see in real life, so to say. And that is important. I often say that to Muslim, because sometimes they ask me, why do you think people think we are scary? I say, well, non-Muslims, of course, they don't read the Quran, they don't read the Hadith, they read you, and they read me and Paul and all other Muslims. So if we behave bad, they think Islam is bad. Do we behave good? They think, whoa, perhaps that's interesting. I want to know more. Then it's good. So that's another aspect, so to say, of this whole idea of anti-Islam sentiments. And of course, and I think that's a very important thing, and it's not mentioned always. And I think it's perhaps even the most important thing. There's secularism, and the secularization of the West makes that a lot of people, especially in Northwestern Europe, England, but also the Netherlands, Denmark, and all those other countries here, they lost religion. So they really don't have a clue. So when they talk about religion, they used to have some kind of understanding, but that understanding is gone because they don't have the knowledge anymore. And sometimes I give this little anecdote. I used to be a teacher about 16, 17 years ago. And one time I was in the Vatican in Rome with a class. It was a gymnasium class, so that's so to say some kind of an Ivy League school. So the children of the next elite, and I was there, and we looked at a painting. It was a painting of Adam and Eve, and you saw the snake, and you saw a tree. And I asked him, "What do you see?"
Right.
And I said, "Yeah, two people with a snake trying to catch a snake." It really was the honest.
They had no idea what was going. They had no idea of.
No, there was one girl. She mentioned the brand of Kappa. You know, the Kappa of Kappa is a brand, a sports brand you see on football.
I wouldn't know about that. Okay.
It's like Umbro or Nike or Adidas.
Oh, okay.
As well. And then you see a man and a woman sitting like Adam and Eve. And they said, well, is it something of Kappa?
Oh, I see.
I said, no. But they really didn't know. And I thought, and that's 16, 17 years ago. So, and that was the first time that I thought, well, they really don't get religion anymore. Back then, of course, I was a Christian, and this was a Christian school, by the way. So it was very worrying. I thought, well, you don't know even your own history, your own big narrative, and that's gone. So now, of course, we see Muslims practicing part of society when it comes to religion. So if they ask for some freedoms when it comes to food or dress or just in general freedom of religion, for a lot of people who don't know religion, it's something very, very strange. They really don't get it. So secularism and secularization is a big part of thinking that people who believe in God, especially Muslims, because they look different, it's something people really, they really practice it. It's scary because they don't know what are they doing. They have this imaginable God and they do stuff and we don't know about. And so I think that's a very big part of the whole anti-Islam sentiment that is there, combined, of course, with the other 5 things I just mentioned. So I think in the Netherlands, there was about 2-3 weeks ago, there was this report. It's called Outside the Church, Outside the Mosque. And it was done by the government. And they said, well, the coming decades, we'll see an increasing development of atheism. So there will be more and more atheists. Now in the Netherlands, it's 51, 52%. So it was sort of for the first time, we see more atheists then all theists combined, so all Muslims, Christians, Jews, whatever, combined, are a minority compared to atheists.
Although this is very, very interesting. Just on that point, there was a survey done recently, a collaborative survey from several universities in Britain, looking at global atheism, and they were looking at various in South America and in Japan and Europe, of course. And finding out, well, what is it that atheists believe? Well, you think that was an easy answer. They don't believe in God. However, and this is the startling thing, and this is peer-reviewed academic research, reported in the media, there are reports in the Times and so on, that most atheists, I kid you not, and I actually did a thing on this, most atheists believe in the supernatural. They may believe in life after death. They may believe in angels. They may believe in all sorts of things. They don't believe in God. Oh, yes, that's for their atheists. But when I hear atheists, and many Muslims, when they talk about atheists, they're thinking of hardcore materialists, like people like Richard Dawkins, the famous Oxford.
I do.
But that's not what most self-described atheists globally believe. Most is not like most do actually believe in things like life after death, or angels, or the supernatural, the word supernatural. So this is, although I accept what you're saying, it can be misleading if it leads us to think that we're talking about hardcore materialists who believe in nothing. That's not what's happening. People they still have religious beliefs. I think belief in the supernatural is a kind of a quasi-religious belief, even though it's not well formed, perhaps. So it's not quite what it seems, these surveys. Although maybe in Holland they really are materialists. I don't know.
No, I think you're right, because, of course, there's this famous religion scientist called Marcia Eliade. He's from Romania. He once said that people are religious, whether they like it or not, and they always will be religious. And of course, we call this fitra, because that's something, it's in the core of how you are designed.
I mean, young people often say, oh, I'm not religious. I don't believe in religion, but I'm very spiritual. They say this, I'm very spiritual. I'm thinking, great, So what exactly has changed? Okay, you don't formally go to church and worship, you don't go to the Roman Catholic Church, but you may still have a profound spiritual interior life. And yet you may be down technically as a non-religious person.
Yeah. True. But what you said about people saying they do not believe in God, that was something they took as, so to say, a parameter in this research. So they said, oh, you do not believe in God? Okay, you're not a theist, because you say there is no theos.
So, I get that. Yeah.
So, but I think because whether they are spiritual or not, they lost the respect and they lost the understanding of organized religion.
Yes,
that's called.
No, that's very true. Very true.
Yeah, and I think that is a problem. And anti-Islam organizations, especially those who are operating in politics, they notice. They notice very well, and they use all these factors for their own advantage in a way, because fear sells. And a great example of the current context, and where a lot of what I just have told comes together, was given last week by on Dutch public television. And by the way, it is important to state that we talk about, let's say, 20, perhaps 25% of the population, but they are very vocal and they are in politics and they're well organized. But most people in the West are, just like you said, are in a way spiritual, and just like in other places of the world, minding their own business. They're very positive. They're not anti-Islam. So it's not that the general population hates Islam, but it's a very vocal, let's say 1/5, perhaps a quarter of the population that is very anti-Islam. But because of they're well organized, because of the fact that they are in politics, they're very vocal, they're on the media. So that's what we see all the time. And it has impact, of course, also on the people who aren't that negative, but it has an impact. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if it's possible for the people. There is a link, right?
Yeah, I put a link in the description below to the program that John was about to talk about on Dutch public television, and I've seen the clips. And John has explained to me beforehand what they can tell. They are in Dutch, although I think you can access translation, YouTube subtext, but they are very shocking. And this is the equivalent, as Joram will explain, of the BBC in Britain. So this is a mainstream, respectable public broadcaster. Yeah. And this is footage that you can see from just a matter of days ago. Discuss it. Well, I'll let Joram explain what happened.
Yeah, and that's true. Thanks. What we see and hear Philip de Winter. And Philip de Winter is the leader of the Flemish interest. And in Dutch or Flemish, because it's the same language, you say Vlaams Belang. And it's the second party in the country, Belgium. But he was invited by this Dutch program on public television, funded by the state, by the way. Yeah. So, and the Belgium sister organization, because that is what Vlaams Belang is the Belgium sister organization of the Freedom Party. So my old party. So, and again, it's the second party in the country. And this was on Dutch public television. We call it the NPO. Like you said, it's the BBC of the Netherlands in a way. Yeah. And it was about Islam and it was about immigration. And of course, we have to discuss politics. I think that's a very healthy thing to do because we want to have an open debate. I'm not so much into cancel culture and stuff like that. But there was not one single critical question, none, really none. It was almost like a commercial for anti-Islam politics. So it's very strange because we all fund this. It's funded by the state with our money. And there are 4 moments in the program that are very relevant and I think illustrative for the topic of our talk.
Please tell us what was said. And I say you can just click on the link below, and if you can follow along, you can see what was said in this program.
Oh yeah. So that's a good thing. If you want to check it out, you can check it out for yourself, and perhaps you hear some words because there are general words. Almost everybody will understand. Well, after all, and I think that's very important. It's the same story that anti-Islam political parties. They spread, whether it's in the Netherlands or Belgium or Italy or Austria or Sweden, but also in France, because we started with Le Pen, of course. But in fact, the theory is French, and perhaps we can talk about that later. Mm-hmm. But there are these 4 moments. And the first thing is that the reporter asked, can you explain what omvolking means? Mm-hmm. And omvolking, there is no real English translation. I looked it up, but there is no real translation. But if when he explains, you'll understand. So De Winter, the guy, the Belgian politician, he says, that's pretty simple. Our people are being replaced by another people. That means omvolking. Volking means folk.
It actually, if you listen to that expression, I know it's in Dutch. If you think about it in English, it actually does make sense. And what you can actually work out sort of what it means, even if it is not translated. You unfolk someone, you unfolk a people. You de-people a people, implying their replacement in some way. Yeah, so it is there. You can actually just about work it out, actually, even in English. Amazing.
Okay, yeah, because it is about replacement. That's the replacement theory, and we'll talk about it later. And he says it's pretty simple. Our people are being replaced by another people. And along with the population exchange comes an exchange of civilizations. Our way of life is being threatened. And then there's a second, this second moment, and he says, then Antwerpen, and that's a big city in Belgium. It's so to say the second city after Brussels. He says it will become Antwerpistan. And Stan, he refers to like Turkey or an Islamic country. And what is happening in these big cities will also happen all over Europe. Europe will become Eurabia. And the third thing is that he says it's about Islam. And he says, but Islam is like an ink stain. It's like a cancerous tumor.
Sorry. Well, can I just stop you there? Did you just say cancerous tumor?
Yeah, like the disease, cancer. Yeah,
I heard you. I just wanted just to pause because this is to put it mildly, is extreme language. I mean, this is analogous to the language some of the Nazis used about the Jews being rats and diseases. I mean, it reminds me of that kind of trope, that kind of language of a minority used by Europeans, even in our past in the 20th century. And so it's appalling language. I just wanted to stress that.
Yeah, it's very extreme, even for. And we are pretty open and pretty extreme in a way in the Netherlands, but even in the Netherlands, to say that Islam is like cancer is pretty extreme. Yeah. So he says it's a cancerous tumor that continues to spread.
Wow.
So it's spreading, and he makes this sign. When you look at the video, you see him do this, and it means it's spreading all over the country. Well, and the fourth thing, and that's kind of a summary of the core message of anti-Islam politics. And of course, I know it very well because I was one of these focal persons.
Yeah.
He says Islam doesn't belong in Europe. And I have to read it here. Islam is a break on every form of integration. Islam is a break on assimilation. Islam is at odds with our culture, with our values, our norms. It's alien. It's a foreign body in Europe. We should not tolerate that. We don't have to subsidize, recognize, or facilitate that. He says, on the contrary. So it's kind of saying we have to do something about it. And it's not in a very positive way. Of course, he says Islam is, of course, organizing a hostile takeover through immigration, through the minorities that already are here. And those immigrants from North Africa, he says, who have not assimilated are the Trojan horse of Islam in Europe. And let's face it, that's what he says. He says, Islam has tried this countless times. We've stopped them in 732 at Poitiers. We just mentioned
before, yeah.
Yeah. We stopped them in 1683 at the Battle of Vienna. And that's the reason why there are a lot of anti-Islam websites called Gates of Vienna, for example.
Yes, again, this is very true. It's quite a prominent trope on the nationalist right. Yeah.
Yeah, and even the crazy guy we just talked about, the terrorist in Christchurch, he wrote on his rifle 1683, and there were people here in the news. They said, well, he wrote down how many casualties you want to make. But of course, that's not about casualties. It was about 1683. There was the Battle of Vienna. So in his thought, he was still fighting this war against Islam.
And the irony is, Western countries have occupied and colonized countless Muslim countries, resulting in the deaths of untold millions of people, even in the 20th century with France and Algeria. I mean, the response to this is so overwhelming that it's almost embarrassing to have to say it. But, you know, if they think they have problems of an event that happened in 732, 1,300 years ago, and another event that happened 400 years ago, well, on the other side, we can go through an extremely long list on a much more massive scale of human death, atrocity, colonization, and I mean, you know, if we're going to play that game, they're going to lose in terms of just the balance sheet of,
it's crazy.
And just to have this still as a motivating political factor today in 2022. Events that happened many centuries ago, still inciting some people to commit acts of terror, is very sad, because you'll never move on, because you'll always have something in history. You'll always be living it.
True. And you see that a lot of people don't know about history, and they don't know about the current history.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's like people they lost touch with reality in a way.
I mean, these events happen, but they're just there's only one slice of the story. As I say, there's a huge other slice of the story where European powers were occupying, and well, I won't go through the boring story again, but there's a massive story to be told on the other side. And if Muslims are going to be continually angry about that for the rest of infinity, you know, this planet is in. I mean, you know, this is just so awful. Anyway, please carry on.
Yeah, well, but it's a good thing, because it's this 1683 thing. It's mentioned so many times, because I was, of course, part of this anti-Islam movement in the Netherlands, and I was the spokesperson on this topic. And I've spoke to so many persons from France, Belgium, Russia, Germany, whatever, and they all mentioned this one event. But the funny thing is, of course, after I left the Freedom Party and was writing my anti-Islam book.
That went well, didn't it?
Well, but I took a look at history, of course, and of course this event of 1683 was something that was very interesting. But the strange thing I found out was that this guy, the general of the Christian army, was called Jan Sobieski. And Jan Sobieski was a Polish general, because there were combined European forces, and the guy in charge was this Polish guy called Jan Sobieski. And in a lot of anti-Islam groups, whether they're politic or not, they are political or not, they have some statues, or they mention this Jan Sobieski guy because he is their hero. Like in India, for example, you have this guy called Pratap. And Pratap was a general who fought against the Muslims. He was a Hindu. And so all these anti-Islam movements have their heroes. And Jan Sobieski is one of the heroes of Western anti-Muslim groups. Mm-hmm. But the funny thing is that when this 1683 event was there and the Christians won, Jan Sobieski said, well, we thank our siege, the fact that we won, we thank them to the Lipkar Tartars. And the Lipkar Tartars were Muslims. They lived in Poland, but they fought with the Christians. They fought with them because they were expelled from the Ottoman Empire long before that. And they said, well, when we look at Sharia, we are living and we are born in Poland. So we have to defend Poland against people who want to invade the country. So they said, because we are Muslims, we have to defend this country.
Wow.
They fought against it. And Jan Sobieski said, well, we have to bring honor to these people. So what did Jan Sobieski do? He built a mosque in Poland in 1683.
This is amazing. I had no idea. Not that I've looked into this much, but that's an extraordinary story.
Yeah. So, and the funny thing, he gave them 2 villages and a mosque. So the hero of anti-Islam guys and anti-Islam organization built a mosque in Europe centuries ago. But the funny thing is, on the other side, there were Christians, people from Hungary. They were Protestants, and they fought with the Muslims. They fought with the Ottomans against the Christians because they said, well,
Catholics, presumably.
Yeah, because if we are going to lose here, and that we the non-Catholics will be killed. Because the Ottoman Empire says we have freedom of religion. We can live there as Protestants under the Caliphate. So we will fight with the Muslims against the Christians.
So you're saying Christians actually fought alongside the Ottoman Muslims at this famous battle because they were fearful. The Christians were fearful that if the Catholic side won, the Christians, would suffer persecution. Of course, the Catholics were famous because there's the Inquisition, of course, the Spanish Inquisition and so on, persecuting non-Catholic Christians, be they Protestants, obviously. So what you're painting here is a very ironically complex configuration of forces.
Not so black and white.
Not so black and white. In fact, deliciously multicolored. Dare one say it. That's. I didn't know that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is. I'm going to have to do a short extract of the video of precisely this point because it's rather juicy information. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, to go back to the last point, and he talks about. He said, well, we stopped them in 1683. We just talked about 1683 at the Battle of Vienna. But he says we have experienced 7th century of suffering in Andalusia. Well, I don't know how he sees Andalusia, but he experienced Andalusia. And he says, so Europe has been invasively occupied by Islam on a number of occasions. So that's what Philip de Winter says, I call this the 3rd Islamic invasion of Europe. This time not with the scimitar, or the old word for swords or saber, but through the immigration route. Right. So, and this is like a summary of anti-Islam politics, the ideology. That's all summed up in, let's say, two and
this is in a public broadcast, Danish television last week, in the equivalent of the BBC in the Netherlands. And because you told me before that these remarks by this Dutch politician, when unchallenged, sorry, I beg your pardon, but when unchallenged, is that right? They weren't.
And nobody said anything.
Nobody said anything.
No, they just nod. They said, "Okay, thank you, clear," and they didn't have one question at all. Just only, can you explain this a little bit more?
And there were no guests. There were no guests who had been invited by that TV channel from a different point of view to counteract what had just been said by this politician.
You would expect that.
Well, yes, but
yeah, it was not the case. So we call this channel, we call it PVV TV, because it's a PVV, of course, it's a Freedom Party. So we call it television.
Really? You even got that nickname, blimey.
Yeah, because it's just like a commercial for them, because people they invite are always pro Freedom Party, pro anti-Islam politics, pro everything that's is against Islam, and then they can have their thing and share their story. But What is important, I think, is the ideology of the current narrative. And a lot of people think about the Great Replacement. You mentioned this when it comes about this word omvolking.
No, this is really crucial now, because now we're going back to France, aren't we? Because this theory of the Great Replacement, which is gaining traction, not just in France, allegedly, and I say it's allegedly because I can't prove it, Macron privately agrees with this theory. I've heard it said. Can't prove that. But it's gaining traction in the United States and in Britain as well. So what is this theory? Who came up with it? And why is it so significant for Muslims, do you think?
Well, of course, a lot of people say it's about Renaud Camus. Yeah, it's a very famous philosopher from France. And he wrote his book in, I think, 2011 or 2010. I think 2011. It's called The Great Replacement. And it's about people coming to Europe, especially Muslims coming to Europe, and because they are with so many and European people don't get any babies anymore, he said, well, it's like a systematic takeover. They replace the native Europeans, and with this, and that's what, like Philip de Winter says, it's like a cultural switch. So they said, well, first we were Christian or atheist or whatever people think they are. And then now we will be a Muslim in the future because of this Muslim influx, this immigration flood, as they call it. And there's a famous other guy, I think he's British or American, Douglas Murray.
Oh, he's British, English. Yeah.
He wrote this book, The Strange Death of Europe.
Yeah, I've read it, yeah.
And in this book, The Strange Death of Europe, he talks about Islam, and he points to this guy, Camus. And he says, it's like Camus saying, etc., etc. And he says, well, we have to stop Islam. And this guy, Douglas Murray, he came to a parliament in the Netherlands.
Did he?
Years and years ago, in 2006, 2007, the political year 2006, 2007. It's like a season, that's like football. But in 2006, 2007, he came and he said the conditions for Muslims in Europe must be made harder. And all immigration of Muslims to Europe must stop. That's what he told the Dutch parliament. But a lot of people don't know that at the core of what Camus and Murray say, there is the replacement. This replacement theory it's another theory, and it's the theory of Jean Raspail. Because we started with France, I think it could be important to mention this thing, and perhaps we end with France as well. Jean Raspail, he wrote a book. It's called Le Camp des Saints. And Le Camp des Saints, it's French, and I think you know French better than me. It means the camp of the saints.
Mm-hmm. And this is a really popular novel in French. It's much less known, unfortunately. Fortunately, in the UK, and I remember speaking to some French friends of mine who live in London, and they hadn't heard of it. But it's in France. And he's still producing novels. He's an old guy now, and this is a hugely influential novel in France itself, though. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and in this book, and it's written in 1973, so it's a really old book. It's decades ago. It was written decades ago. He says that it's like a dystopian book.
Dystopia vision of the future when
France will be flooded with immigrants and flood will fall, and because of French falling, whole Western society will fall, and it's all because of the immigrants. But nowadays, this whole idea, of course, like we just heard Philip de Winter say on Dutch television, this is something that is a shared theory, a shared belief in anti-Muslim organizations, anti-Muslim groups, but they don't talk about immigrants, they talk about Muslims. That's why he called Europe will become Eurabia. Antwerpen will become Antwerpistan. And Stan, of course, like Turkmenistan, Afghanistan. So he refers to it will be an Islamic country.
Yeah. Melanie Phillips is a famous British writer. She wrote a book about Lundistan, this same kind of thing. We're very Islamophobic.
Well, and that's the same way of thinking, of course.
Yeah.
And that's a worrying thing, especially because a lot of non-Muslims and even non-Muslims don't know, but Muslims don't know. It's about the way the far right, especially the anti-Islam organizations, are being organized nowadays, because they're organized very well, very professional, and they're in the European Parliament as well as a group.
Right.
It's a fourth political party in the European Parliament, so it's a big group. They're even bigger than the, so to say, conservatives. And it's called Europe and Identity. And Europe and Identity, like it's of course you left the European Union, but European Union is still there. And it's very active. And this group in the European Parliament is active as well. And this group, it exists out of, for example, Front National, the party of Marine Le Pen. It's called Rassemblement.
Yeah, it's something else now. But yeah.
But also Flemish Interest, the guy, the organization we just talked about, this guy, Philip de Winter, is their leader. But there's also the FPÖ. FPÖ is the Freedom Party of Austria. And a crazy thing there is that it was founded for and by ex-Nazis, really, the Nazis from Germany. So after the war, they started a new organization. It's called the Freedom Party in Austria, the Austrian Freedom Party. And there are a lot of people with that background are still active there. Of course, they're old people now, but that's an organization, and they all work together now. And I think that's a very worrying thing, because we saw Marine Le Pen, to go back to the beginning of this conversation. We saw her over 40%. She gained over 40% during the last elections, and I think if she will run again in about 4 or 5 years. Yeah. She will be president. Right. It's not something crazy to do.
And she has said I mean, at one point in the election campaign, I remember hearing that it was reported that she has said, well, now I'm not going to require that women not be permitted to wear hijab in public. I'm not going to insist on that anymore. And I thought, well, finally, some common sense, because how can the gendarme in France possibly enforce that? And then actually, she stated publicly a few days before the election, actually, she did support a total public ban on all hijab wearing in France completely. And so I thought, so much for common sense. I mean, this woman would bring, and Macron said this, and he was right, I think, she would incite civil war by her policies, because you'd have, well, obviously, you'd have big populations who'd resist that. And how could the police possibly enforce this legally? It'd be impossible, and so you'd have this civil disorder on a huge scale. So completely, and that's just one policy, by the way. There's not. There's a lot of other things you want to do as well. So it would be very bad news indeed for France and everyone if she won, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But Marine Le Pen, she is in this group. It's called, like I said, Europe and Identity. It's a second organization. They used to have another group, but they changed. Some parties left, some parties came. But Marine Le Pen, with her party, came to the Dutch Parliament a few years ago, and I was still in the Freedom Party then. And she visited Geert Wilders, and they talked about how can we strengthen each other? How can we make our message be stronger? How can we share it with more people? How can we gain more power, etc., etc.? So, and they got along very well, because when it comes to Islam, they feel the same. There is no difference. Of course, when it comes to public, the public, sometimes Group A is kind of milder than Group B, Group C, etc. But in the end, when the door closes and they talk inside the room, everybody agrees, they're all on the same page. So that's a very worrying thing, because I've really met her and I've seen her talk with Geert Wilders. And what they said was, it's just the political program of the Freedom Party. And the political program of the Freedom Party is a little bit different than what we see with Marine Le Pen. But in the end, she will try to enforce Muslims to leave the religion, because that's what it is in the end.
Well, what's the political representation in your country like? I mean, in terms of MPs, I mean, how many are there? What percentage are they of the total number of MPs in the Dutch Parliament now?
The Freedom Party.
Well, or so all the parties that might have that kind of view, whatever they may be, Party A, Party B, or how influential are they within the overall parliamentary?
It depends, of course, on the election, but between 20 and 30%.
Right.
It's pretty big. It used to be. I've looked it up. In 2009, it was 11%. That was anti-Islam and explicitly anti-Islam and open about the fact that they are anti-Islam. But nowadays it's 26%.
So it's 26% in Holland, and if the recent presidential elections, Marine Le Pen, she got 40-odd, 46, I forget the exact figure, but over 40% of the vote. So we're dealing with very substantial proportions of the French electorate and the electorate in Holland. And what about other countries like Sweden, and you mentioned Austria, but what about other countries in Europe?
Yeah, it's all between let's say 15 and 30%.
Right.
And France, of course, because they have another political system, so you gain a lot more. But during elections, got 42%. But with us, it's very we have so many options to choose from. This we don't have a presidential system, so it's not that we say we go for A or B. You can choose, let's say, 13, 14 parties.
Is it proportional representation? Is it? Yeah.
So that makes it it softens it softens in a way,
right.
But overall it's when you take the average it's around 20-25% with most countries, and I think that's a very worrying development, because again they're very well organized. And they're in the European Parliament as well. They're in all the other parties. We in the Netherlands we have we say PVV TV. Of course, it's not really television station of this party, but because this message is almost the same, it strengthens this way of thinking.
And it's mainstream. It's clearly mainstream. If you're a public broadcaster, the state broadcaster is broadcasting this uncritically, unchallenged, as we can see. Yeah. You've just made it mainstream. It's acceptable discourse, you would say.
Yeah, and you see what the impact is, because in the Netherlands we have the 4th and the 5th of May are days we remember the Second World War. Right. The 4th of May is the day we think about the death and all the people who suffered, etc. And the 5th of May is the day that we celebrate our freedom. So we call it, in a way, it's Liberation Day. But there was this research done by a big television station on the 5th, and they asked, on the 6th, that's the day after, and they asked, how do you feel about Islam?
Strange question to ask, but anyway.
Yeah.
Did they ask, how do you feel about Zoroastrianism, or how do you feel about Hinduism, or how do you feel about...
No, it's because the 6th of May, I don't know if you remember Pim Fortuyn. There was this political figure in the Netherlands.
He was assassinated. Was he assassinated on that day?
On the 6th of May.
So I see. Okay.
So they asked him, and because he was a very anti-Islam politician,
very much so.
They asked the people, what is there still in your mind when it comes to Pim Fortuyn? How do you think about Islam? And over 60% said Islam is not a part of Europe. It's like Philip de Winter. It's alien to our culture. It has nothing to do with Europe. So that's over 60%, because Marine Le Pen, of course, gained 42%. But when it comes to this specific topic of Islam, it's over 60% of people think that Islam has nothing to do with, in this case, the Netherlands. And that's, I think, a worrying thing. And of course, it has to do with all the points we've just mentioned in the beginning of this conversation. But of course, it has also to do with us as, let's say, the Muslim community, because we have to explain. And when we look at the Quran, for example, you have the Surah of the Beast, call to the way of your Lord. So that's something I think we should improve. To share this message of truth with other people and show them that Islam is not a scary thing. On the contrary, it's really beautiful.
But I think so much Dawah, I mean, it's a slightly different subject, but so much Dawah that I'm familiar with, maybe it's not very representative, is really focused on refuting Christianity, refuting the Trinity and so on. And that's fair enough. That there are clear statements in the Quran about, Jesus not being God and so on. I get that. But in Europe, if one is addressing Europeans, people from Holland or England, or whatever, the vast majority of people don't go to church, don't identify as Christian anyway. So you're fighting a battle that may have been relevant 20 years ago, or certainly a century ago. But now this is not, it's not as if Holland is full of Christians who are preaching the Trinity.
I really wish.
Exactly. It's full of atheists now who don't believe in anything, well, apparently. So, this Dawah, to the extent that it is representative, what I've seen, is kind of misplaced, because it's not the issue, which is why I don't focus so much on Christianity, but I focus on atheism and my no design post and so on, because it's this sense of losing faith completely. And Christianity is infinitely better, in my humble opinion, than secularism, because at least it acknowledges God and the prophets and so on. And a lot of Christianity, of course, is true in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is very, very true what you say. So I think that when people do Dawah, focus on the fact that in the beginning there is a God. That's the first thing, because I just mentioned this story, this little anecdote about Adam and Eve.
Yes.
If people really don't know story one of their own big narrative, that's a very freeing thing. And another thing is that, and I've mentioned this report in the beginning, it's outside church and the mosque, done in the Netherlands. It also mentions that because of this secularization, we'll see that let's say 70-75% in the future of the Netherlands will be atheists. What atheism is,
whatever that means.
They will be atheists. They will not associate themselves as religious. They don't see themselves as a religious person because they don't believe in God. But there was another thing mentioned, and was that Islam, when you look at the percentages, will be the biggest religion in the Netherlands, but it's only 9%. So we have 91% non-Muslims, and we have Islam as the biggest religion. So it's a kind of, it's almost a crazy situation that you have Islam as the biggest religion in a completely atheistic context. So, of course, that's a worrying thing and a very strange thing. And I think it's unique in the history of mankind that you have a society that chooses to be non-religious. When you look at the Soviet Union or Cuba or China, you could not be religious, otherwise you would get killed. But now people want or whatever, they don't know religion anymore, so they are irreligious, so they're not believing.
But the irony is, places like the Soviet Union, which did enforce atheism and secularism as a matter of state ideology, once that system collapsed in the 1980s, whatever it was, people went back to church, and the Russian people are not atheists. This is precisely the opposite of Holland. That they went back and are still going back to the Orthodox churches, which are very powerful in Russia. So a lot of this is to do with the kind of the cultural and political history of a country. And I wonder, the country like Holland, as it works its way through secularism and atheism, will come to the realization that ultimately there's nothing there, and they need, the society needs God, it needs faith, it needs religion, it needs God, to establish a social order that is wholesome and healthy and guides people. And without that, if you have a nihilism, then there is nothing to live for, and you see rates of depression increase, and anxiety, and loneliness, and breakdown of the family, and these are symptoms of this secularist ideology. And this is something Douglas Murray, you mentioned in his book, The Strange Death of Europe, which is an amazing book in many ways. He correctly diagnoses the malaise, the sickness at the heart of Europe. Now, Douglas Murray is an atheist, by the way. I mean, he doesn't believe in God. Although he's a cultural Christian, so he would know about the Adam and Eve story, because he's an educated cultural Christian. He definitely would know about that. But he says, look, we have no faith. Europe has lost its way. It's committing suicide, but by not having babies, by not believing in anything, it doesn't know what it's for anymore. What is Europe about? What's it for? And he says this is a problem. Now, Islam, representing the faith of Abraham, the prophets, is in a perfect place in Europe to remind Europe of their own faith, which they've lost, which is the religion of Abraham, and found in the prophets and Jesus Christ and Muhammad, peace be upon them all. And so Islam can remind Europe of their own faith, ironically, and it's not a new thing. It's just an old thing that's been forgotten.
Yeah, and I often say here in the Netherlands, when you translate the words, I tell people we can offer, as the Muslim community, we can offer the 3 G's. Yeah. And it's called, in Dutch, it says God, gezin, gemeenschap. And it means God, family, and community.
Oh.
So that's what we lost in Europe, because people don't believe in God, and Islam has this. It's a logical religion, so that's something people can accept if they look at it with an open heart. Of course, there is family, because when you look at the family struggles a lot of people have here, that's something that Islam urges, of course. They say, well, it's very important to have a family, a father, a mother, children, etc. And community. There's a sense of community, even when we go to mosque or whatever. There's this community sense, the ummah. So that's something that what Europe lost. There is this answer is there. It's called Islam. And it's funny, you mentioned this Douglas Murray guy. He's an atheist. When you look at Geert Wilders, he's an atheist as well.
Is he?
I once had a little discussion with him. It's the only conversation I ever had with him about religion. Because the Freedom Party was what we called the protectors of the Christian heritage. So once I asked him, Geert, do you believe in God? Because of course I was a Christian.
You were a believing Christian, yeah.
Yeah, and he said, why do you want to know that? I told him, well, because we are the protectors
of the Christian civilization. So it's a perfectly natural question.
Yeah. So he said, I don't know. And then this other guy, his assistant, he said, well, so you're an agnostic. And he said, what? And he didn't know what an agnostic was.
What?
Yeah. So he said, well, get back to work now. And that was the only conversation I ever had. And it was, for me, it was the first time I thought, okay, this is kind of crazy. You have this guy who runs the show when it comes to protecting Christianity, who doesn't believe in Christianity. He doesn't even believe in God. And now we have the new kid on the block, another organization. It's called Forum for Democracy.
Oh, right.
It's a new party. It's
in Holland, is it, obviously?
It's in the Netherlands, yeah. But this guy, the guy who leads the show, he explicitly said on television, I do not believe in God. I'm a cultural Christian. But he is always talking about Christian heritage, etc. So we have two guys here protecting Christian heritage, although they do not believe in Christianity. They don't even.
You can't have the heritage without the faith. The heritage is a fruit of the faith. You can't have the fruit without the plant and the roots in the soil. It's ridiculous. You might as well just throw the whole thing away and start again. But you can't do that because they like cultural Christianity. I mean, it's a very poor way of running a show, really.
Yeah, and it's the same with to get back to the first thing. This omvolking, this theory of the replacement theory. A lot of these people, for example, Geert Wilders, he doesn't have any children. He doesn't have kids. So if you're very worried about we as white Christians or whatever are being replaced, then the least you can do is have a lot of babies.
and guess what? Douglas Murray has no children either.
Oh, there it is.
So, this is very, very ironic. They're complaining about they're cultural Christians but don't believe in Christianity. They want more indigenous white babies, but they won't have any themselves. They really want it both ways. They want the fruit without the root. If that's the right word. It doesn't make any sense. You've got to work from the bottom up. You've got to have the faith. And that's what the heartbeat of Europe for most of its history has been, a passionate belief in God. And that's what motivated Peter to build these beautiful cathedrals. These cathedrals are architectural wonder, and the great art and the music of Johann Sebastian Bach and so on, motivated by faith. You couldn't have Bach without his Lutheran piety, his passionate faith in God. Obviously, if you know anything about his music, it doesn't need to be argued for. You couldn't have Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris without the
St. Paul's Cathedral.
You can't have this stuff and not have the religion. I'm sorry, Douglas Murray. I'm sorry, Geert Wilders. You can't have your cake and eat it. You've got to have your faith. And if you're anti-faith, and Muslims come from this same faith, it's rooted in the same reality, the reality of God who made the universe, who gave us these abilities to create great things for his glory. So it doesn't make sense, does it? It all kind of doesn't stand up what they're arguing.
No, and it's a strange thought that I once had, but it's almost like Europe has to forget their own identity in a way before they can accept Islam, because in a way Christianity is like a barrier for for Islam. When you look at history, of course, they fought these battles, etc., etc. When I look at my own past and the struggles I had as a Christian becoming a Muslim, but after you leave that, or perhaps these children I once taught that they didn't have this belief in God, so it makes them more open in a way to Islam. And at the same time that secularization kicked in, let's say the 60s, 70s, and all these Muslims came into Europe. So in a way, it's almost like a natural or organic development that perhaps Islam shows people this is the answer, this is what we can have, this is the future. And of course we have our own European context, just like people in Asia have and in other parts of the world. But I think it will be of course we're Muslim, but of course I think it really is the answer, and it's not a political message or something, but
and there can be a local expression. Think of Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim country in the world, has more Muslims than any other country in the world, and it's not an Arab country. I mean, they don't speak Arabic there as the first language. They speak Indonesian, obviously. And it's a very beautiful country, beautiful people. They're lovely expression of Islam. They're all very devout, hundreds of millions of them. Yeah. And it's not an Arab country. I keep on stressing this because you can have a European expression, I would argue, of faith. And you mentioned your book. Obviously, you're European, but the foreword is written by two people: Hamza Yusuf, who is a Caucasian American, and Abdul Hakim Murad. Obviously, that is an Arabic name, but his actual other name is Timothy Winter. He's an Englishman. He's an English reaver, as white as you and I are. So there are three people who are prominent Muslims, all of whom are Caucasian Western people here, and representing an Islam, an expression of Islam, which is indigenous or native to Europe and the United States. So it is happening, it happens, and there's a picture on the cover there of a Muslim. There you are. You can see what he looks like. This is what a European Muslim looks like, folks. Yeah, can you relate to that? I can.
Hey, but it's true. It's true, and of course, the concept is already in Islam. It's called urf, that you have to adjust to the culture where you come as new Muslims, and you can accept everything as long as it's not contrary to the religion. So it isn't that scary. It's something beautiful. It's something that can be accepted by everybody. And Indonesia is a perfect example. But also, for example, Singapore. In Singapore, they have a prime minister with a veil. It's a woman. She's Muslim.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah.
I need to check that out, because I've been to Singapore and I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, and it's a very successful country. It's a very rich country. It's a lot of people want to be in Singapore, but it's run by a Muslim woman. So it's not that because that's the narrative a lot of anti-Islam organizations share. Islam isn't something for poor people or for people from outside or strange or backward or whatever, because look at Singapore, look at Indonesia, look at Malaysia, and a lot of other countries in the world I don't mention now. There's so many examples of Islam being something prosperous, something beautiful, but people have to want to see it. They just have to open their eyes.
And it's also the irony, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I do like to mention it, remind people from time to time, Europe is wedded to Christianity. It's the Christian European faith. And so, Jesus of Nazareth was a first century Palestinian Jew who didn't speak English. He didn't speak any European languages. He probably wasn't white in the modern sense of the term, and didn't believe in secular democracy, and was not a liberal, and didn't advocate parliamentary elections. And so, none of this is true of Jesus whatsoever. And historically, Christians in Europe have worshipped this guy. And if you go into churches, certainly in London still now, you'll see portrayals of Jesus and Mary as very white, English-looking people. But this is not true. This is not the reality. That they would have looked like the Palestinians or the Arabs you see in the Middle East now, probably, I would guess. And their language, Jesus' language, Aramaic, is very similar, is cognate to other Semitic languages like Arabic. Indeed, the word for God, the Jesus word for God in Aramaic sounds an awful lot like Allah in Arabic. In other words, just down the road from there, in a place called Mecca, there was another prophet. He's from the same part of the world, actually, from Jesus. If you look on a map, Palestine and Arabia are quite close to each other, a long way from Europe. So it's kind of odd that we see in Europe Christianity as our religion, and yet it's actually from the Middle East, just as Islam is from the same part of the world, and it comes from the same root, which go back to Abraham and even before that to Noah and that. So the great irony here is the other is actually already in our midst, and yet we don't see it as other. We see it as our own, but it never was our own. It always was from the same part of the world that Muhammad.
True. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, beautiful. It's also when you look at Spain. Spain has been Muslim, of course, for a longer time than it is Christian now. Yeah. So when you look at Bosnia, Turkey, Albania, there are
white Muslim countries. You mentioned these are white Muslims, and they've been Muslims for centuries, and they're in Europe, obviously.
Yeah. And even when let's 732, we just mentioned 2 times in the conversation. When the people came from Northern Africa to France, people think there was this clash between the Christians and the Muslims. But in 732, a lot of places in Europe were still pagan. They weren't Christians. They weren't Christian at all. Look at Finland, for example. It's up till the 18th century before they were all Christianized. Yeah. So there wasn't a Christian.
And at that time in England, of course, England didn't exist, but it was very substantially a pagan society. And so Muslims then were proclaiming the truth about Jesus and Muhammad and Abraham, the prophets, to a people who rejected all of them in England, in what is now England or Finland or something. So we great irony here.
Yeah, it is. True.
Okay, well, perhaps we can draw that to a conclusion. I do recommend the book with this European Muslim on the cover. Sorry to go on about that. Apostate, with foreword by 2 other Western converts, Hamza Yusuf and Professor Timothy Winter from Cambridge University. That's the back cover. And I will link to the program on Dutch public television if you want to see what we were discussing in the description below. And I was very shocked when I first heard about what's happening there. Joram, did you want to say anything in conclusion at all?
Well, I hope this episode of Blogging Theology it makes clear to a lot of people that there is this development going on, and it's not something marginalized. It's really in your face. It's out there, and it's being more and more acceptable for a lot of people. And I think it's very important for the Muslim community to answer this in the most positive way, just like the Quran says, because that's, I think, the only way forward, and that's the only way we can attack this and counter this horrible way of thinking. And by the way, I am in London next Tuesday, so I was wondering, and it's something else. There's this speakers corner, right?
Yes. Yes, well, that's it meets on Sundays though. It's not every day of the week.
Okay.
Yes, no. If you turn up on Tuesday or whenever, you're not going to see anything happening. It's only on Sundays. Are you here till Sunday, or are you going back?
No, we're just one day because we have this Islam Experience Center, of course, and we're starting a museum now in the Netherlands, the first Muslim museum, by the way. So that's.
Do tell. So, where is this in the Netherlands? Whereabouts is it?
In Rotterdam, the second city of the Netherlands, and we're starting it's the first Islamic museum in the Netherlands, and it will be a very high tech museum. So we have virtual reality, augmented reality, hologram, stuff like that. So it will be the first VR museum as well. But it's also, so we have this traditional narrative in the most high-tech way presented to the public. But you guys in the UK are much more, you're ahead of us when it comes to VR and stuff like that. So we have to get our equipment in London. So that's why we visit.
Oh, I see. You're getting your equipment from. Okay. Well, we probably get our equipment from Japan after that. So I don't. Well, that's great. Well, I do wish you very well with that project in Rotterdam. That sounds extremely exciting. The first one of its kind in.
When we open, I'll invite you.
Inshallah, it would be an honor to go. I'll take a camera along and show that. It'd be fantastic. Well, best wishes for that, Joram. And well, I guess that's it for now. And safe travels to England on Tuesday. Yeah, it's pretty safe here at the moment. We don't have much COVID. We got this new, is it monkeypox or something? That's but at the moment, we're not having to wear a face mask or do anything different this time. But anyway, safe travel. So thank you very much. Until next time.
Assalamu alaikum. Bye.